73 were children.
It's very, very important. Obviously we understand the police are going to try and, target those at the top, and they're trying to, cut the head of the snake, really, so to speak, which is fantastic. But you've still then got the runners on the ground that still need support as well. And there needs to be more investment in helping those that are on the ground, and more education, more investment into how we divert young people away from crime and give them alternatives. But also the demand, somebody needs to be looking more at the demand, and why is there such a huge demand? We know lockdown has increased drug use. We know lockdown has increased drug use in young people who now have their drug debts, which are now being paid off by doing county lines and then entrapping them. There's lots of different things to this. This isn't just about enforcement. And it's great that they've done it, and it may have reduced those county lines. But to me, it sounds as if, if the county lines are reducing, why have we still got so many young people going missing? Why have we got so many young people being pulled into this? Because the demand is there. Therefore, these young people are supplying. And if we are to really address the problem, we need to address everything, not just the top and the enforcement aspect of it.
Once these kids and sometimes adults are safeguarded as a result of the police operations and they do get out, how difficult is it actually to turn their lives around?
I think you just have to have the right support, and sometimes services are only there for a short period of time. Other services like ours and Refocus, who works with young people, we've just been talking about it. You need to have that investment into services where they can be in a young person's process. Now, that may start at the age of 11. We've had young people that have approached me in school and talked to me and said, it's too late, I'm already involved, and I don't want to change. And then come 16, they're then being arrested and handed over to Refocus for high risk.
Sorry to interrupt you. Are you saying kids as young as 11 are doing this?
Yes, definitely. And, sadly, they don't know. All they're tempted by is the money. It's the reward at the end of it. That's what they're thinking of. They're not thinking of the consequences. They don't understand the impact of what this has got on them long term. They just see the attractive trainers. They see the money. And sadly, this is where the lack of education in schools needs to increase. We need to really expand our mission to be in schools like we are. I mean, we're in them today. So it's just about really exposing this problem as much as we can for young people to make those decisions, having understood the consequences. But then there are those that are victims to this as well, that can't get out. And like you said, it is difficult to get out. But if we can make sure that there are things on the ground, much more kind of alternative options for them, then we can keep them occupied. Then we can start looking at how we bring them away. Like, for example, we're trying to raise money for football coaching because we've got young people who are entrapped in paying drug debts with county lines, and we're trying to get them away by doing the things that they like doing best and helping them to come away and see that there is a hope and there's a future for them.
Thank you very much, Bali Rodgers. Let's talk to Met Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Graham McNulty. Thank you very much for joining us. Obviously a very big police operation here, 1,100 arrests and 1,138 people safeguarded. How difficult is it to distinguish between who needs to be safeguarded and who needs to be held accountable for their actions?
So obviously every case is on individual circumstances, and we look at the circumstances around every case very closely. What I would say is, in policing, we have focused more and more on the line holder. That's the individual behind the county line, the person coordinating activity, exploiting young people, taking the profit out of the drugs. That's our focus. That's been our focus in this intensification week where we've made these 1,100 arrests, and that remains our focus. With those younger people exploited and brought into this, we obviously want to try and safeguard them and divert them away from county lines.
What were the ages of some of the children that you did bring in as a result of this? I mean, we were just hearing there from Bali Rodgers that kids as young as 11 are getting involved here.
So I think the average age for juveniles who we see involved in county lines is between 15 and 16, but we've published our strategic assessment today, and there are case studies in there around 12-year-olds who have been brought into county lines. And that's why, our focus is twofold: identifying the child traffickers, the exploiters, and doing everything we can to get them arrested, get them charged, put them before the courts, but also working very closely with those young people who are brought into this and really exploited and exposed to violence, trauma, grooming, and trafficking ultimately.
And what is the scale of it? We were just hearing from Bali Rodgers that lockdown has increased drug use, and with that increased the level of debt that people are holding and the vulnerability then of those people to actually getting sucked into this.
Well, of course, it's covert by nature, isn't it? It's criminal, so it's hidden from us. But in our strategic assessment, which has been published today, what we have seen over the last couple of years is that the number of active lines are coming down. Our estimate at any one time is there are 600 county lines. And we have seen changes through the pandemic, the way in which county lines gangs are operating. And we've been adapting our tactics and methodology to do that. But I do believe that we are starting to turn the tide on county lines, and we're making big inroads with the arrests and charges as we've seen this week.
So how would 600 county lines now compare with what it was before?
So I think if you look in the national assessment that came out in 2018, it talked about 2,000. I think the last estimate was about 800 to 1,100 active lines. And I think the current one is we're at about 600 active lines. That's what we see month in, month out. But of course, that's 600 too many, isn't it? That's not enough. So although the direction of travel is good, we want to do more, and we want to focus on it even more in the year ahead.
And you mentioned that you've seen changes through the pandemic. So tell us a bit more about those. How are the way they're operating, how is the way they're operating evolving?
So we have seen traditionally a significant use of coaches in the rail network. And of course, during the pandemic, there weren't coaches running. The footfall on the train network was much less, which meant it was easier, and perhaps policing had a better opportunity to make interventions to arrest these individuals. But what we saw during the pandemic was maybe gangs moving to cars, which in a way probably involved older people. So we've focused more on the road networks as well recently to try and stop them using those networks to get their drugs across the country.
When you have these operations and these 573 children are safeguarded, what happens to them to ensure they're not just going to go straight back into this system?
So there's a variety of responses. You know, sometimes we find a young person, they're in a house, the drugs are being dealt from, they'll be in danger, they might come into police protection initially, whilst we liaise with social services to find them longer term care. Others may be on the fringes of it and not fully involved yet, but we work with some fantastic charities, the Children's Society, Rescue and Response, St Giles Trust, organisations who are helping so hard to find alternative pathways for young people that are more constructive for them and get them away from this heinous crime.
And can you sort of peg the backgrounds of these vulnerable kids in any particular area, or is it basically across every single demographic?
I think these individuals who run lines, they're manipulative, and they will look for people who maybe are more vulnerable, who maybe are easier to recruit and then groom and then traffic. So they will look for young people maybe who perhaps aren't in school, who perhaps have got a tough life at home. And, you know, they'll pretend to be their friend. It will be a nice pair of trainers. It will be a nice new phone. You know, they'll be reaching out to them, and and this individual may think this is someone who cares about me, but very, very soon that will change. Very soon they will want their money back. They will want that individual to be carrying drugs for them. And really, they're getting young people to do their dirty work for them whilst they're making money out of county lines, which is why it's such an abhorrent crime time.
And we have seen a lot of changes through the pandemic, and we were talking about the increase in drug use. What is your sense, looking at what you're coming across, of what the picture is on that and what the longer term impact might be?
So throughout the pandemic, this 600 figure of active county lines has actually sort of stayed pretty stable, pretty static. So we've not seen significant increases or changes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if you could talk more broadly, not just about the county lines, but about drug use and whether that has increased. There is a perception that it has increased, and obviously, as you say, these things are not always documented, so it's hard to get a grip on, but it's just whether there is something that has changed and that will have a longer term impact once the pandemic is over.
I mean, it's really difficult to tell. We know during the start of the pandemic there were some shortages around drugs, but unfortunately we saw pretty quickly drugs being available again for people. I suppose the one issue that has not been in play during the pandemic, the nighttime economy has been shut. Obviously, we see drugs misuse linked to some elements of the nighttime economy, and obviously that's not been taking place. So in policing, we're watching very carefully as restrictions are lifted, as society gets back to normality, and of course we all want to return to normality, don't we? But we want to ensure that we don't allow drug dealers to flourish.
And policing obviously has changed in the pandemic, and going forward there will be new challenges. And I mean, we were hearing, for instance, about GPs. They're suddenly seeing a huge increase in the number of people wanting to see their GP where they haven't been able to necessarily. What are you anticipating about the immediate challenges ahead for the police?
So just to say, policing has been open throughout the pandemic.